Today we're going to be talking about the elements of design for a water efficient yard. We're going to be focusing on just 1 minute. Okay, so the goal for today is, there we go. The goal for today is to teach you how to fish. You know, they have the saying, teach a man to fish, or give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. Well, hopefully today, I'm going to help you learn how to fish. So let's jump in. Just as an introduction, I've been working in the landscape industry for almost 20 years. It's been about 17 now. I got my bachelor's degree from Utah State University in landscape architecture. Design is right up my alley. So this is something that I've enjoyed putting together this presentation. And anyway, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and we'll try to address those questions as best you can. Okay, so hopefully you will today leave this class with a little bit of an idea of what you can do artistically in your yard. This is not a class to tell you, put this plant here, put this plant here. Hopefully we'll just teach you the principles to be able to have a good idea, build a little confidence in yourself to design your own yard.
Okay. Are you going to get into a lot of plant material anyway?
So there are some slides at the end of the presentation that has some plant materials. We're mainly focusing on combinations of plants and what works, what to look for, that sort of thing. We won't really dive into this is a good plant because of X, Y, Z. We won't show a lot of examples of individual plants, but more as a composition.
So there's going to be other classes. So if you're really interested in what you're in principle now, if you want plants to come to the classes that we're going to be doing on plants that are coming up, or the pre-recorded classes that we already have, focus on perennials or trees or shrubs. So there's some on our website that we recorded in previous years to check those out. Yeah, it's not needed with depth all that.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, we had a class that dealt with spring perennials, and we'll have other classes about trees, annual flowers, summer perennials, fall perennials. Those are all great classes to come in and participate in. If you have a question about the specific plants. Okay, when you are thinking about designing your yard, the first thing that you need to do is get a base map for your yard. This shows just a really rough draft of a baseline. If you're in a newly constructed home, sometimes you can contact your builder and they will have in their blueprints the plot map and you can get that from them. If that's not available to you, then you do it kind of the old-fashioned way and with a tape measure and a sketch pad, and you just draw it out. So you can see in the bottom left corner, that's exactly what we did here, is we just went around and put measurements down on the paper. So 96 feet here, then 72 feet there, 64, and you draw it to scale. That way you know exactly what the scale is, and you can size your plant material accordingly in your spaces that you want to design according to the actual size of your plot.
Interrupt your flow. You can also do some stuff on Google Maps.
Yes.
If you want just base, you could be looking at an area image of your property, and there are even some measurement tools within Google that you can do.
Yeah.
So if you're savvy enough with Google and Google Maps, you can do this using Google.
So it's Google Earth and not Google Maps. Google Maps is what takes you from A to B. Google Earth has a measure tool in it, but they use the same images, which is nice. Okay, so after you've got a scale base map, this is your blank slate. This is what we want to start with. Then you want to make a copy of it and show what you have on your site. This is called a site inventory or analysis. So for the site inventory, you are just writing down what you already have, what specific conditions you have in your yard. So some examples that we see here, we have, there are great views to the northeast of my property. There is a shed back here in the corner. This area of my yard gets full sun. This area on the west side of my house has poor drainage. So maybe I need to think about all these things are going to affect what you do with your design. Full sun in the front yard, kind of narrows there. Shade from the house in for a good part of the meter on the north side of the house. Anyway, so things that you're looking for, you're going to be looking for your slopes. Anything with a steep slope, you're going to treat a little differently than a flat site. Your shade areas and where you get full sun, that's something that is important. Where you have good views in your yard. If you have a nice view, you want to frame that view and make it so that you can see that a lot. Just a quick story. I had my house that I just moved out of. We had a really great view of the mountains from my kitchen window, and I would love to just stand there and watch the storms coming down the mountains. Back behind us, we had just a field. And then they decided to develop behind our house, and it kind of sloped down. The lots kind of sloped, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to be able to see over this house. Turns out the builder decided to match their finished floor elevation with my finished floor elevation, and so they filled in their lot and brought the house up, and I lost my view of mountains. Anyway, we became really good friends with the neighbors behind us, so it was okay. We just didn't get to see that view anymore. So good views. I mean, it's nice to be able to have those views and things that you'd like to see. Another thing that you want to do is consider what you see out of your windows from your house. I mean, that story illustrates that also. If you're going to be standing at the sink doing the dishes, it would be nice to be able to look out that kitchen window and see something nice instead of a shed or your compost heap or whatever it is. But consider soil drainage. Your soil will impact what you can plant or how you maintain that. Some plants really prefer well-drained soil. Other plants will prefer one that has a little bit more organic material in it. So being able to know how the water moves through your soil is important. You can get a soil test done through USU. If you take a sample to the county extension office, they will send it off and have it analyzed for you, and you can pick that analysis up and know basically what you need to do with your soil. Utility lines are important. You don't want to plant trees under a utility line. So if there was a utility line running through the backyard of this property, you wouldn't want to plant a tall tree under those lines. Being aware of those things, you want to look down at the ground, you want to look at eye level, and then even up above where you normally may not actually look. It's important to just get a good picture of what you have on site. Okay, once you have that analysis done, then we can start to dabble in the design. So what makes a good design? There are several different things. The elements of art. When I started to do my degree in landscape architecture, we talked about these 7 things a lot. There are, and if you think about how we see things, this is how we really see things in nature. There are lines and there's a lot of texture. There's different shades of the same color, shapes, colors, forms, and space. So we want to think about these things when we are putting a design together as a composition. So the elements of art, these are the visual components of the whole landscape, and they act as the framework to your design. So here are some examples of these different things in a landscape. And these are all aerial views, plan view, top down, looking at them. So we have here on this walkway, you can see that there is some shape here. We have different shapes with the triangle, grass area, but then there's also these circles and these planters. There's some variation in the tone of these different plants in these planters. So to illustrate those, we have just these different colors here. Again, there's lines. This middle picture here of the lines is from a Japanese Zen garden. They do this on purpose where they'll rake out all of these lines. It's very deliberate. And so it's appealing to some people to have that very exact, deliberate line in the design. You can see that there's varying textures in this other picture. You have a nice soft plant at the top. Right next to it is a concrete paver border, and then another concrete border. But then inside those 2 borders is that gravel walkway. So you go from a very nature soft look to a hard and then even a rough look. That texture difference is appealing. And then again, we have a little bit of tone here, having different shades of that gray in that same design. And then finally, we have a nice line of road running through the natural landscape. We can achieve this, like we have seen in these other pictures. You can achieve that line to what that line can do is help guide your eye through the design. Okay, so that brings us to this next slide, which is the principles of design. The principles of design these are the tools that you use to implement all of the elements of art. So you use things like a pattern, contrast, you emphasize certain things. There's balance, proportion and scale, harmony, and rhythm and movement. And so in using those different elements of art, you can use these tools. These are the tools that you have in your toolbox, and create a really nice composition by varying different things. I personally really love to use contrast, especially with texture. So if you have a large leaf, put it right next to a plant that has really small leaves, and they will, your eyes are attracted to that difference. Okay. Emphasis is really, it can be done very well with contrasting colors. And so if you want a plant to really stand out, then let's say it's a really chartreuse leaved plant. And then maybe you plant really dark leaved plants behind it to make that color pop. And balance, and we'll talk about some examples here also. So this bottom left picture of this fountain with these pots. You have some repetition with the pots, and they're leading your eye up to this area that I labeled emphasis. That's where you want to, a lot of times in these gardens, this is like a play on an Italian garden. A lot of times in these gardens, you will have a sculpture at the top of that fountain. And that's what they want you to focus on. And so it's designed to lead your eye up to that focal point, and that's your emphasis. Okay, but then how do they get there? It's some harmony of the different pots and making them all kind of work together to emphasize that. There's movement from with that line that you go from the bottom to the top. There's also balance. They're equal on both sides. So that works out well for that. This middle picture shows some different patterns. If you were to look at this picture, where does your eye go when you look at that picture? Yeah, it follows that bench and almost points you right to the shed. Almost. I would hate to say that the shed is the focal point of this picture, but it is. But there's other things in this. You have some contrasting colors. This lighter gray back behind it is a red leafed plant. Those contrasting colors, complementary colors, are really attractive to the eye. The bottom right, you can see that they've used some pavers out in their lawn to show a little bit of contrast. Makes it interesting. Another thing that we see here is some really hard edges with the concrete retaining walls. Very straight edges in the design here, but then it's softened up by the plants that are in them and in front of the fence and the wall, I guess. And so there's that contrast in texture also. Okay, so now that you are familiar with the elements of art and the principles of design, now what does it take for you to figure out what you want? There are a lot of different things that you can do in your yard, and it's really a matter of finding some inspiration and figuring out what you want and what you need in your yard. So if you want to have a kids play area, you'll try to designate an area in your yard for that. You want a vegetable garden, find the best place for that in your yard. If you want pollinator flowers because you love to see butterflies and bees, then find an area in your yard that would do well for that. It's okay to have an area where you have some lawn that you can play on or use in your yard. So these are just some examples, pictures of some of those areas: a fire pit, a gazebo. If you want a little bit more natural looking yard, you just want to be conscientious about how you are going to go about your design. And of course, we here at Weaver Basin are going to encourage you to be as water efficient as possible. That is one of our goals, is to help you save water. That's why we do these classes. Okay. So there are places where you can get some inspiration. We have our learning garden here on site. You are welcome to come up and walk around. The snow is melting, and so you may actually be able to see the plants. A couple of weeks ago, that wouldn't have been the case, but we are starting to see some plants wake up. The bulbs are starting to come out of the ground, and so it's a really exciting time of year for, at least I think it's an exciting time of year. So we have examples here. You can go around to your neighbors and see what they have. Take pictures, and they think you're weird, but if you explain it to them that you really like their yard and you want to copy them, they'll be flattered. There are magazines that you can look at. There's the internet, of course, and then the famous Pinterest, which is used for just about every DIY project in Utah. Okay, so there are different styles that you can use in your design. If you want to go for a more organic look with nice curves and wavy lines, excellent. If you are like my wife and like straight lines, then that's what we've done in my yard. There's eclectic styles, there's formal styles, more modern, like we saw in the pictures before. In this one, the bottom right here is a much more modern style with the geometric design. You can go for a country garden, and again, water-wise, that's what we're going for, water efficiency. Okay, so you've done your site, well, you have your site plan, you've done your analysis of what you have on your site, and now it's time to try to figure out how you're going to piece things together. And so you make up a really basic concept plan. That's what we're seeing here is that concept plan. So if you remember in the slide before, we had this area here on the northeast that had some really good views. So we decided to plan this area of the yard so that we can see over that fence and it won't be blocked by any tall trees. Okay, we have a nice shade flower bed under the tree because the tree is going to shade those plants. Have other flower beds and shrub beds. An area just right next to the house for the kids to play in. There's a door and a window here, so kids can just run out real quick, play in that area, play on the lawn, and come back in to the mudroom, I'm assuming, and not get the house all dirty. And then another thing that this plan illustrates is how you want people to move from one area to another in your yard. And that's what these arrows are showing, is the paths that you can have in your garden. Okay. So you've taken your dream list of things that you want to have in your yard. You've found a place for them in your yard, and you've developed this plan. Okay. So now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of how are we going to use plants in a design. And we're going to focus, not necessarily talk about individual plants themselves, but what to look for when you are doing a design. So let's make things interesting. When you are designing, you want to group plants that use the same amount of water together. They have the same light needs, same soil needs, same water needs. That's called hydrozone. When you hydrozone, you will probably end up with a list of different plants that are full sun, part shade, and full shade. And when you have that list, you can use that as kind of your plant palette, almost like a painter has his palette of colors. You're going to use your plants as that palette to design and fill in your yard. You're going to want to look for varying plant heights, different leaf colors, different flower colors, different textures on your leaf, like I talked about before. We have plants that have really large leaves that look really soft, and then plants that look prickly or have a really fine texture. And it's fun to play off of that texture. Also, bloom times of your plants. That would be, for me, that would probably be my last consideration, just because your plants, you're going to see the green on your plants, the leaves of your plants, for a longer period of time than you will with them being in bloom. So it's a good thing to consider the bloom, the size of the flowers and flower color, but also consider when they are in the flower so that your yard has something in bloom all the time. Unless it's the winter and then nothing blooms. Then another just design tool is to use odd numbers in your yard. Unless you have a very symmetrical yard, you would use odd numbers and use groups of, if you're going to be grouping them, 3, 5, 7. You can also use groupings of groups in those same odd numbers. So if you're going to have one accent plant, one is enough. If you're going to have multiple plants, then put them in groups of odd numbers. 7 is probably as many as you want to put in. If you were to go up to 9, that might be a little much. Okay, so talking about comparing and contrasting these plants, we've talked about this a little bit. There are different ways that you can contrast using your plants. And we talked about plant color, combining dark plants with light plants, combining different colors of plants that play well with each other. Also, we can use the size of the plants as a way to contrast. Some have some are really big and some are really small. So if I had, there's a trick that you can use. If I had a really narrow yard, but I wanted it to look deeper than it actually is, something that you can do is plant, from your vantage point, you can plant plants that have big leaves right next to you and plant plants that have really fine leaves, small leaves away from you. So it creates a bit of an optical illusion for you, and it almost creates that depth because your reference of these plants that have big leaves are closer to you, and the plants that have the small leaves are they're not as far away as they may seem. But there are design tricks like that that will help you create that illusion of depth. The texture contrast, using something that is soft looking right next to something that is maybe a little more pokey, that's good. And then form, using vertical plants with horizontal plants, or having different shapes of the plants working together so that they create that movement. If you were to look at this drawing here, you almost read it from left to right, and you go up to the top of that tree just by looking at that picture. Or you can look at the tree first and go down towards that horizontal. There's some really good resources about design and helping you to learn about design online if you do a little bit of exploring. One thing that you want to be sure that when you go to the nursery, that you're reading the plant tags. The plant tags will tell you what the mature size of that plant is. Why is that important? It is important because you may end up with a huge tree right next to your house. When you bought it, it was just a little guy. And it, just like kids, they grow up and they get big. So be sure that you're giving your plants in your yard enough space to grow to maturity. So look at those plant sizes, do a little research, make sure that your plants are big enough for your site and not too big for your site. And that kind of plays on the scale of your yard. You're not going to plant an oak tree in a 4-foot planter. because that oak tree, the diameter of the trunk at maturity is going to be larger than 4 feet at maturity. So,
Question for you.
yes, go ahead.
You may get into it later, but you know, like when you're looking at your plants at the garden places.
Yes.
Have the zones.
Uh-huh.
We have varying zones here, right? So what is traditionally the zone we need to stick with?
So here in this area, we are at about a zone 5. And that's kind of where I would stick to. So anything zone 5 or lower in number should work well for Utah. Yeah, you'll find a lot of plants that are zone 5 and zone 4, zone 3, and they'll do really well. Now there's that brings up an interesting scenario. The south side of your house and the west side of your house are going to create a bit of a microclimate. They're going to be warmer than say the north and the east side of your house, just because right up next to your house you have that reflected heat. And you may be able to get away with planting some higher zone plants in those areas. Now, if you plant those in those areas, you're almost setting them up for failure. It would be a nice experiment. My dad has some banana plants and some canna lilies right next to a shop. Has a southern exposure, and they have come back year after year. He does also insulate on top of those with some mulch. Yes. Yeah.
Most of the websites that I search for plants online, my husband's the same ones on 7. Is that not? Yeah.
That is not accurate. I would stick to about zone 5. Yeah.
And you said south and west.
South and west. Yeah. So you think about the hottest parts of your house in the summer, the south is getting that sun beating down on it. And the west side is where the sun sets. Hottest part of the day, it's going to be the hottest part of your house. Okay, any other questions or great comments? Great questions. Okay, utilizing plants, shrubs, perennials, and flowers. Sometimes you want to have them overlap so that one plant kind of blends into another plant, and that way you get a good continuity throughout your site. When you plant your plants, if you designed, you're going to plant it to the size of your plant at maturity. And so you may have one plant here, and you may have another plant over here, and there's going to be some space between those plants, and it may look bare, but that's okay, because after a few years, it's going to fill in, and you're going to be happy that you don't have to take any of those plants out. Before they'll just choke out each other, and the survival of it is at that point. Okay. So consider the scale of your site. If you have a small site, use small plants. If you have a large site, you can get away with using larger plants. Okay, so let's talk about color. Color is one of the really fun things that you can use, one of the really fun tools that you could use to really emphasize certain things, really make the plants stand out, is by using different combinations. So we're talking about here different combinations of plants. So you put tall plants with short plants, red leaves with green leaves. When I would design flower beds, I would use the color triad, which is, if you look at a primary color, they have maybe red here, red. If you were to pair it exactly across, that is, the green is the complementary color. But you can follow this triangle here with red, and instead of going straight to a green, maybe you can go over to a blue and to a yellow, and those will, the blue and the yellow will then complement the red almost as well as a green would. Same thing goes with maybe a purple. You draw a line over here, you have orange, and you have kind of a yellow green. If you pair those together, you get some really good interest by using those different color combinations. Don't overdo it with these different color combinations. You want to have maybe 3 or 4 colors in an area. And then if you have different flower beds that you are using, maybe you use one of these colors in, or maybe you're using 3 colors in one bed, and then you use one of those colors with 2 other colors in another bed, and kind of move your eye that way so that there's some continuity and continuance throughout your design. Again, a large leaf with a fine leaf, just another good trick. Plant combinations using color. You can have a warm color palette, which is basically from a green with a little bit more yellow to it, all the way to a red. This side of that color wheel is your warm colors, your hot colors. And then the other side of that color wheel, from your reds down to your blue and your blue greens, those are your cooler colors. When you're thinking about plants, most plants have green already in them because of the leaves. And green tends to be a color that your eye isn't really drawn to. It's the color green is almost a soothing color for your eye because it is in nature. It's just about everywhere. And so it's not a color that your eye is really drawn to. And so it's a good background color. So if you wanted to plant something that you want to stand out, then using an orange or a red with your green is an awesome way to go about that. And then those oranges and reds you would use a little bit more as an accent color. Okay, so these are some examples of warm color plantings. These warm colors, they have an effect on your attitude. These tend to be a little bit more energizing. They tend to be happier. They just make you feel that way. This is one reason why I love spring, is because most of the spring flowers are a warm color palette. But this is just a couple of different designs here that show a good use of warm colors. Now you'll notice in this larger picture here that there are some purples in there, and that is just a color contrast used to be a little interesting. Okay, so it kind of breaks up the warm colors, the yellows, the oranges, the reds, and lets your eye kind of relax a little bit from all of that stimulus. Okay, this is the opposite. This is your cool colors. Your cool colors tend to be more relaxing. So if you want your yard to be party central, then warm colors. If you want your yard to be a spa relaxation zone, then cool colors are the way to go. Okay, and then of course you can use some of the warm colors in a design that you're typically having majority of the plants be cool colors, just as accents to kind of break that up. I don't know if I would do any yellows in these designs, but an orange here and there might look really nice. Any questions about warm colors, cool colors? Awesome. Okay, so now that we've talked about plants and how we can use them, we want to talk about how to structure your design. There are some different aspects to a design. You have kind of a skeleton, and these are the main components of your design. So your accents, the things you want to focus on in your yard. Those are the things that make up the structure, the skeleton of your yard design. And so trees here, we have your activity zones, other focal points, point them out here. So we have that bench down towards the front door of the house. Down here in the bottom left, there is this flowering tree. So this is just an accent tree. It's kind of anchoring that corner of the lot. Have this nice tree here in the middle that is right next to this paved area. And that's kind of anchoring that part of the yard. And then up top here is another focal point. So you have your skeleton there. The next part of your design is all of the aspects of your design that connect your skeleton parts to each other. These are things that add interest, but don't take away from what you want to focus on. They're just accents. Usually they're smaller trees, large shrubs, paths and border plantings along those paths are a nice way to use this, but this is really what is moving you through your design. Are these elements. And you want to use these in repetitions of groups, just so that you have good continuity in your design and a good movement throughout your design. So here are some arrows here showing what those may look like. So down here at the bottom, you see these red and green plants. Those are just a nice border planting right next to the house, accenting the house, but also they can lead your eye from the front door here to that tree that was acting as an accent tree. Have your path that you're moving on. Also, these small groups of plants here, you see that they're all throughout this design. Even up in here, you have these plants that act as an accent to this tree that we decided was the focal point. And then you just have these different groups that kind of lead your eye down to other areas that you wanted to focus on. So that's a good way to design, is you have your anchor points and that skeleton. You have these areas or these plants and things that you use to connect those. And then finally, you have everything else. So you have the rest of your space that you need to do something with. So you use a filler plant. And these typically are shrubs, perennials. They tend to be a little lower growing. Ground covers, even mulches. Work well. Don't be afraid to leave bare soil also. Sometimes soil looks good. And so don't be afraid of just bare soil. Lawns. Let's talk about lawns for just a minute. Lawns in this area of the country are heavy users of water. So use them intentionally. We're not saying that you get rid of them altogether, but use them for a specific purpose. So if you want your kids to be able to have a wiffle ball game in your backyard, then have a place for them to play wiffle ball in the backyard. And on the lawn is a great place to do that. So if you have a good intentionally designed lawn space, then that's okay. Another thing that I've seen a lot is people think, oh, I need to fill every square inch of my yard. I'm going to put this plant, and I like that plant, and you end up with a lot of different plants in your yard that don't really go well together. And so sometimes less is more. Sometimes a simple design with simple planting is enough to really get that aesthetic to where you want it. If you overplant with a lot of variety, then you may lose interest. And that's not what we want. We want our yards to be the most interesting. Okay, so here are some examples. You notice that this dark green masses, they're filling in those areas using around borders, other groups of planting. You have mulch areas here, and that works out really well. Of course, lawn is going to be a filler also, but we want to use it intentionally. Okay, we're nearing the end. Let's talk about some combinations of plants, some things that work really well. I found most of these online, and these are just examples of, like this one here is a little bit more of a wildflower type feel to it. In this design, you have an alabaster augustaceae, also known as hyssop flower. That's kind of back here in the back. And then you have a pale purple coneflower. You can see that is just here and there. And then you have this blue echinops, which is almost a thistle-looking flower. Blue is a hard color to find in nature. And so once you find a flower that has blue in it, using it well and with the right complementary colors or contrasting colors, I recommend that. Just because it's hard to find in nature. So this is an example of just a wild flower design, almost looks like a prairie, planted a little bit more in masses than individual plants. And I feel like it's a really nice design. Okay, another plant combo, color combo here is we have the salvia, which is one of my favorite plants. I love salvia. I will plant salvia every day of the week. It is just awesome. But it has a really fine looking flower with it, and it grows in a spike. And so you can either complement that with other flowers that are growing in spikes, like this penstemon, or you can have something like a rudbeckia, black-eyed Susan, that has a really nice big daisy-like flower to contrast that shape and texture. But this works really well. The colors go well together. The plants have a similar water needs, and the penstemon helps to soften up the look of that salvia. Okay. Again, salvia with grasses. Green fountain grass works really well. You want to be careful with green fountain grasses, especially the perennial grasses, because they will reseed. And so if you don't mind that, then plant them. If you do mind that, I've had them get into my lawn and start to grow in the lawn, and they aren't as fun to walk on, and especially barefooted. And so if you do have green mountain grass, just put down a pre-emergent herbicide to inhibit those seeds from germinating and growing. Also in this design, you'll see in the back, some daylilies. These are a taller variety of daylily. The leaves on the daylily are grass-like. You have some down here in the lower left corner of that picture also. So you have a grass-like plant, almost complementing the grasses in that design. It's the same but different. And then some other flowers in there also. Okay, so if you want to do kind of a Mediterranean design, this is a great example of that. There are a lot of plants in this design. So we have some creeping thyme. That's going to be down here closer to the border of your pathway. They have some irises in here. There's the mugo pine. That mugo pine is going to add some color